Hey everybody, my name is Jose.
And my name is Ian.
Welcome to A Different Kind of Hex. We're a podcast that explores TTRPGs from the player perspective. We're all about optimizing our fun as players, finding our own individual play styles, and embracing our agency at the table.
Jose and I are both members of an online gaming community called The Open Hearth, where we focus on indie RPGs, story games, and the world of tabletop gaming more broadly, with an emphasis on safety and inclusivity. Every week there are games going on at The Open Hearth, games like Bump in the Dark, Ultraviolet Grasslands, Urban Shadows, Triangle Agency, and many others that I can't tell you about because I can only fit so many games on my screen at once. If you're listening to this podcast right now, you can go and sign up for these games. We'll have the link in the show notes. I guess even if you're not listening to the podcast, you could sign up too, but it's a good place to start.
So, for each episode, we are going to hopefully have a guest from the Open Hearth community. And today we are honored to have Gwen Marshall with us. And she's going to talk with us about character creation, the first phase of play in a lot of games. We hope you enjoy the conversation.
Roll the tape. Okay, so Jose, when we did our first episode, our Session 0 episode, one of the things we set out for ourselves is that we're going to approach this topic, our show, A Different Kind of Hex, with the beginner's mind. And in order to pursue that goal, the very first guest that we've invited on our show is a PhD, someone who has done a lot of learning and a lot of beginning. Our guest today is a game designer in her own right. You might know her as the author of Ancestry and Culture and Alternative to Race in D&D 5th edition from Arcanist Press, which, as an aside, I'll say that I had a copy of years before I met you and did not realize that it was you until just basically last week. She is a professor of philosophy and interlocutor of Baruch Spinoza. Perhaps you've heard of him. But most importantly, she is our friend and fellow player at the Open Hearth. Our guest today is Dr. Gwen Marshall. Welcome to the show.
Oh, well, thank you very much. It's lovely to be here.
Great to have you, Gwen.
So we like to start the show, I say, as though we've ever had a guest before. We like to start the show by asking you about your gaming habits, your poison, if you like. Can you describe to us, and I know this is like maybe a lot, but can you describe to us generally what you're excited about when you sit down to play an RPG? How would you say that your play style has kind of evolved? And do you think that there has been a crystallizing moment where you realized something important about your play style?
For sure. That's great questions. Tabletop role-playing gaming is a many-splendored thing. And there's so many different reasons to find enjoyment and ways to find enjoyment in it. And I am a bit of a pluralist when it comes to that sort of thing. In fact, my interests are probably broader than a lot of gamers because, I still, to this day, am not ashamed to admit I like trad games like D&D 5th edition. I like tactical crunchy games like Lancer. I also like, but I will admit, my probably catnip is games where I get to explore messy, preferably queer youth relationships. So Monsterhearts, Masks, things like Thirsty Sword Lesbians, things like that. Those are probably my favorite, but I also can find enjoyment. I have different parts of my brain, and they will, for example, right now I am in a game of Thirsty Sword Lesbians. I love it. We've got 5 people all playing femme characters, and we are now 4 out of 5 of us are in a polycule, the characters, It's that sort of thing. And it's just going to get messier and messier. I couldn't be happier. It's such a blast. I'm also starting up a game of Beacon, which is a fantasy skin of Lancer. And so I'm going to be making, this is tactical, crunchy. I'm thinking about like how to maximize my MP per turn regeneration so I can do my area of effect attacks from the furthest distance with the, blah, 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 all tactical nonsense. I love that stuff. That's fun.
You also get to have the image of like big particle effects and like cool Final Fantasy outfits and stuff.
Exactly, right? It's like Lancer's cool, but what's also cool is if you're a wizard.
Crystals.
Yeah, right. So it's, I'm having a good time with that. I mean, that's just, some, and then I'm going to be running next week a game of lasers, a hack of lasers and feelings I wrote called Eldritch High, in which you play teenagers that are struggling with puberty and also their bodies transforming into cosmic horrors. Or, maybe those are the same things, maybe they're different things.
Where have I heard that kind of game prompt before?
I can't imagine what you're talking about, Ian.
So it sounds like you take a kind of buffet approach.
I really do. I usually am in 3 or 4 games at once. And so I like to have kind of different modes of operating. It's like tonight's my kind of like, if you go to like a board game night and it's like, you got your like crunchy strategy game and then you got your abstract game and you got your like 10-minute in between kind of, you like mix and match. It's like you got to have your protein and your veg and your starch, at every meal.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it seems to me that there are as many different ways to play games as there are gamers, but even that isn't sufficient because every gamer has a different way of approaching any given game. And so now you're getting into this kind of Mandelbrot fractal, like, the games are just going to keep coming out and new ways are going to keep getting invented.
I mean, yes and no. I would say that there are some generalizable principles that I can apply at least to my own gaming experience. For example, I am the kind of person that generally likes to explore, I'll just be entirely honest, elements of my own personality. And I will play them out through characters. And I will often explore messy parts of my personality by taking almost like an allegorical like archetype of that element. And, so it's like if I am struggling with anxiety, I make a character who is almost debilitated by it and explore an extreme version of it, that sort of thing. So I'll do that. That's one kind of almost like a quasi therapeutics self-exploration exercise. And I have done that of course, in Powered by the Apocalypse games, but also even in character elements of a trad game like D&D. But then I also really like puzzles. So games that prompt me to figure out mysteries or calculate how to kind of maximize my resources, either OSR games where it's like, I need to survive to this point on this many rations. How am I going to do it? Or how am I going to hit the 7 bad guys without hitting any of the good guys with my bomb or whatever? I like those sorts of like challenging puzzle things, right? It's like, what if I but if I set it up exactly, you ever did that? I mean, if I'm playing on like a grid, I'll count the squares and be like, okay, if I set the fireball right here, I hit all of them and none of me, none of you guys. Oh yeah, I love that.
That's one of the kinds of hexes that we reference.
It's a thing. And then, but the thing that I really enjoy though is playing the different kinds, because I take something from one kind of game and I end up using it in a different kind of game to enrich my gameplay. Mm-hmm. My games of, like I play on Thursday nights, I play in an old school Essentials game. And it's just as hardcore old school as you could imagine. It's a bunch of mostly dudes in their 50s playing this game with me, for better or worse. And, but I am still like exploring my character's motivations as I move through this grindy, it's meat grinder, and loving it, making intentionally suboptimal decisions at times in a way that doesn't mess up other players, but it's just fun and interesting. That is something I learned not from trad gaming. You know what I mean?
But it seems as though it has enhanced your experience elsewhere.
Oh yeah, immeasurably. And I also am I find myself the kind of player that comes to a table, sees what the tone is, and then offers a leitmotif, something that like sets it, like that is a contrast. So if it's a table full of like tactical thinkers, I'm going to come in and know how to do the smart tactical thing, but maybe intentionally be it's like I'll be the queer disaster in the game of 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons, or if everyone is a queer disaster, I'll be like the business-like person. I'm like, my character will be like, oh, we need to get this in order, a little bit like Ian, your character in our Blades in the Dark game, like we need one of those characters because we wouldn't get anything done. Our little troop would just be fooling around the whole time.
So I'm curious about, so you're talking about different styles of games that you like to play. When you think about character creation, what's the first thing that occurs to you in terms of how you approach the process in one of these styles? You can choose whichever one you want. How do you approach character creation? Do you do it ahead of time? Does it start in your imagination before session 0? Is it responsive to the group? Those kinds of things. What comes up for you?
I'll try and be more helpful than saying all of the above. But one thing that happened, and this is in part to answer the last question that Ian asked, which is like a moment where I really learned something about myself as a gamer, was in 2010 or 15, sometime around there, I first read Apocalypse World and the principles and started watching people play it and then started playing it. And I came across the saying that you should play your character like you would drive a stolen car. Mm-hmm. And there's this attitude that like, look, and in those games, the point isn't to win or to advance in levels or to achieve the objective so much as it is just to tell an interesting story. And that might be an interesting story about hot messes of characters or people that die tragically or whatever. And it just was so liberating because the whole plane of possibility opened up. You didn't have to like choose what was the maximum or the optimized character, or you didn't have to progress the most efficient way towards the stated goal. It just allowed this freedom. And so I still bring that into character design or creation now. However, I generally do like to hold on to a core idea or concept. So usually what will happen is if it's a system I already know, this is quite easy. If it's a system I don't know, I sit with the book for a little while. I look at just like the character backgrounds or archetypes or classes or whatever. Honestly, I look at the pictures and I look at if you could describe this class in 1 or 2 sentences, just to get like that level of what is this about? And I look for something that's interesting to me. Usually for me, I don't prefer characters that solve problems with violence, except for when I do. Sorry. So for example, I usually am playing characters that use guile or intelligence or wit to get out of problems, around problems, to reframe problems. I'm the kind of person that doesn't like to take a challenge on as presented by the story or scenario. I like to reframe it, come at it from an unexpected angle. That sort of thing is fun. Because part of what makes the collaborative storytelling fun is the way we can kind of tilt the world a little bit to see what falls out. Except for when I want to play like the barbarian, I'm playing a gnome barbarian who is just like absolutely exuberant with life. And she just is like, I can't wait to jump into messes and hit them with axes, like that's her thing. And it's fun to play a character like that sometimes. Mm-hmm. So what I often do is I look at the options and I check in with what I'm feeling. The next thing I do, I go look for character art. I don't know why, having a visual to inspire me in many of my games is a critical part. And then I start imagining, who is this person? I take all this like interesting ideas into the session zero. I see what other people are playing. I try not to, I respect niche protection and let people be their own thing. I don't want to duplicate. Not that I care about balance. I just don't want to step on anyone else's toes. I'm usually flexible enough that that's easy to do. I can maneuver around other people easily. And then I start digging into character motivation. So it's like big picture archetype. How does this fit with the setting and party relationships? And then I'm like, who is this person? And I look for their core trauma or like what sets them apart. Then finally I say, okay, how do I represent this in the mechanics? And that's when I start looking at numbers, dice, abilities, spells, etc.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say about the visual, right? Having a portrait. It's really powerful for me too. It's almost like as I'm beginning to imagine a character, if I have a portrait, I'm like coming back to the portrait and looking in their face and saying, "Oh, is this person? Is this not this person?" And there's something happening. Yeah, it's like, does that match? And there's something sort of an integrative effect that it gives me in terms of, because with all these pieces, I'm going to make a story about a background, or I'm going to have a particular motivation or a particular, even a relationship maybe that I'm beginning to imagine for this character with somebody else. But I'll just keep going back to the photo and say, or not the photo, the portrait, let's call it, and saying, is that really who this person is? So it's powerful for me that way.
Would my character do this?
Isn't it interesting to play? One of the things I find just such a joy, and again, I learned in part from Apocalypse World, is play to find out what happens. Another way to put it is I play to find out who I am, what I'll do. I don't know. I have surprised myself many times leaving blanks in my character concept, and I go into an environment and sometimes I roll the dice and see what they show me. And then I'm like, well, I guess apparently I'm gay or whatever. If I'm playing Monsterhearts, right? You often don't know who you're attracted to until you roll the dice, which I think is a fascinating mechanism. But I'm playing a game of Night Witches right now, play by post actually through the Open Hearth. And I created a backstory that was kind of tragic, like this is a traumatized person who's lost their family and all of that. But I found a picture that just spoke to me, and it's a young woman in like a dirty mechanic's jumpsuit, and she's kind of like leaning on the plane, like she's got everything under control. And so I'm like, okay, that's how her pain is manifesting, right? This like low key resistance / casualness that is going to get her in trouble and is disingenuous, but it's a defense mechanism. And so all of a sudden I have this rich character to work with, right? Because I started with an idea and then I connected it with a photo, and they didn't match right away. So I had to think about how they could.
It's funny that you should say that, because I definitely feel that I'm more often than not, when I'm creating a character, am backfilling more than anything else. I really resonate with what you said, Gwen, about niche protection. I almost always, if I can help it, will create my character last. I will come to the table with like 2 or 3 different classes or playbooks, and then have the option in case somebody is like dead set on one of my first choices. And I often will not start thinking about who the person is until that stuff is locked in. And I'm like, okay, well, so I've got this in our Blades in the Dark game that we're playing right now. I'm going to try to avoid talking about the specific events of ongoing games during this podcast, because I always think that telling somebody about your tabletop game session is like telling somebody about your dream.
Showing them your vacation photos.
But, I created this character who is this kind of scheming mastermind because I thought that a group in Blades in the Dark should have a scheming mastermind. And it wasn't until I had locked that in that I went backwards and decided some things like, well, this guy is a military veteran, and this guy has a massive chip on his shoulder. And so I'm going to be really interested. I'm putting a pin in this thought right now. I'm really interested in your thoughts, Gwen, about how the process of character creation extends beyond the session zero.
Oh, yeah. That's a great question. In fact, while you were before, one thing that I was considering sharing is that, I alluded to leaving blanks in the character concept, like the story, filling those in as the story progresses. There are times if I show up, if it's a convention game or a one shot, or if it's just the nature of the game being run, where you're given pre-gens or you create characters, ex nihilo at the table with everyone. So I don't have all this time to like conceive of an archetype and find art. I mean, sometimes they just hand you a pre-gen with a little photo on it and you're like, I have to look and be like, who is this person? Who can I imagine them being? I look at their little stats and I'm like, well, this tells me something, but I'm going to have to find out through play. And what'll happen has happened many times is there'll just be something happening, a decision point. And I just kind of I just go with my gut or make an arbitrary decision. And then I just build on it. It's like, it's kind of the yes and building on improvisational sorts of rules. If somebody else establishes something in the scene, you work with it. If I establish something about my character, I just keep building on it. I'm like, well, this is who this character is, apparently.
You didn't know that until you made that choice, though.
Exactly right. I have absolutely done the thing where I'm like, I think this character is going to be like this. I made a character who, one of my like favorite characters of all time was a D&D character that a gnome. One reason why she's one of my favorites is because she was the first character I really committed to and really felt I loved. That was femme. That was a woman character. I played long before I was like 7 or 8 years before I transitioned. Well, I built her as this like idealistic, knowledge-seeking wizard who really just wanted to collect volumes for her family's scriptorium in the Underdark and all of this. And after playing for a while, I just really started to enjoy like blowing people up. I just was like, this is pretty cool, actually. And so then she slowly twisted into like this kind of power-hungry, arrogant character who used the talk of wanting knowledge as an excuse. What she really wanted is power. And I didn't know that until I started playing it. And then it just came up and it was like, oh, because there's something about the experience of playing and playing and playing with your friends in a D&D game. And then everyone's kind of pitching in. And then all of a sudden you hit level 5, but you're a wizard. And so, the fighter runs in and he swings his sword and the rogue comes over and stabs somebody. And then you're like, that's all nice. Boom. Okay, well, I killed all the rest of them. Right? And, they're just like, whoa, fireball's great. And I'm like, I know, thank you. And it just kind of happened.
It's interesting that because you were talking earlier about like sometimes you come in, like say you're experiencing a lot of anxiety and you want to create a character that, is going to explore that somehow. And now when you're talking about your gnome, it's like you were coming in wanting to maybe consciously or unconsciously wanting to explore a femme character, right? And then you created this kind of, blow things up kind of femme character over time. And it's interesting because it's happening in the improv with the other people, but it's also something about your own exploration of that archetype so I'm a psychologist, so it's going to show at times, but some kind of archetype is wanting to be expressed through you and you get to explore it in that interactive environment. And that's different from if you were just writing a story on your own or doing a piece of artwork on your own or even talking to another friend on your own. There's something really evocative about that collaborative process, right?
You're absolutely right. And it's interesting that we're calling it a collaborative process, but in some ways it was a deeply individual one too.
Yes, definitely.
Because for that period, from about 2014 to 2022 even, I almost exclusively played strong, anti-authoritarian women. Side note about me, that's also my type of girl that I like to date. It's also there's this kind of saying in like, do I want to be with her or do I want to be her?
Be her. Mm-hmm.
And so like, that's exactly what I was exploring. Like, those are the people I'm attracted to. I've always known that about myself, punk rock chicks or whatever, as they say. But then I started to realize I wanted to be them. Mm-hmm. And it kind of came out through exploring it, allowing myself to try on being them. Right. And I said, this feels good. Mm-hmm. And so I explored all kinds of different ways of being a woman you don't want to mess with. And it was so wonderful. I still do that sometimes, not always. Sometimes I play characters that are, exploring different elements of my personality now. But for a long time, it was femme power was my big kind of character backdrop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my big thing was himbos. So really stupid because I didn't want to be smart anymore. I had too much. There's another PhD in the room, and so I'd been too smart, and I wanted to be stupid, but with a heart of gold. Like, mm-hmm. and they would cry all the time and wear their hearts on their sleeves, and they were super sensitive. And I'm still playing those characters actually, because there's something I'm exploring around a vulnerability and masculinity that I want to embody, and also give space to explore that. What does it mean to be, a man who may be strong and but also has a lot of vulnerability and heart in them. And we don't get to do that a lot, or I don't get to do that. And so there is the RPG game for me to explore it from different angles. And it doesn't just take one game. It takes multiple iterations, I think, to really get that sweet spot.
I just have to say, I earlier thought, oh, those girls are my type. Oh, no, I want to be those girls. That guy, that's my actual type, actually, I've discovered. That's who I'm with, So, yeah, I get it.
It's okay to have a few.
A few types.
Honestly,
earlier in the thing, you act, there's a lot of different approaches.
That's right. Well, that's true. I could say more, but this isn't a relationship podcast.
Jose and I were talking before you joined the call, Gwen, about the difference between handwriting and typing. And the way that like embodying the thought by physically writing it out engages more of the neural network or something. I certainly find, I'm not a neuroscientist. I might be completely talking out of my ass here, but I do find that I remember things better when I write them down. I vibe more with notes that I have written down or music that I have written down physically on a piece of paper than something that I have just like thrown together in a more virtual medium. So maybe there's something about being able to embody that version of yourself, either to try it on or to exercise it or something like that. I find that if I have a type, I am usually playing, as you have seen in our game of Blades in the Dark, downwardly mobile men of privilege. Like
interesting.
In this case, it's a military officer, but I often find that I include, lately it's been consciously, but earlier on it was subconsciously, elements of like deep time and time-based horror or uncertainty. And I've realized that that's a big way of me kind of working through a sense of like neurodivergence and time blindness.
Oh, that's interesting. I am in that game. I mentioned of two things. One, in that game of Thirsty Sword Lesbians right now, I am absolutely, I alluded to this a minute ago. I've been on again, off again, polyamorous. And so like reinvestigating that in this lesbian sword wielding, we're playing, it's a She-Ra skin called the Castle Gay Skull.
Awesome.
It's on the Thirsty Sword Lesbians website. It's one of their like play sets. It's amazing. Setting that aside, but I embody like the act when I play a character. I embody them in very visceral way, and you'll notice people do this. It's not just me. It's lots of people. We joked about like, oh, telling somebody about your tabletop game is like watching paint dry or whatever. It's so like self-indulgent. But what's interesting is when people do it, here's how they talk. I was playing this game the other day and my character did XYZ, and then they start describing what their character did and they shift to first person pronouns. Mm-hmm. It's not she did this, it's I did this. And then as you build to the crescendo of the big climax or whatever, and then he did, and we, and I, and it's very much you're there and you and your friends sharing that experience. It's not just your characters. Like that bleed, the line between you and your character just kind of disappears for a little while. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I played this game. Fallen Angels was the title of the series. It was Night Witches, right? Mm-hmm. With Brandon running on this open hearth. And there were several times in that game where I was openly just weeping. Yeah. Because of the deep emotion going on, like my character was flying with her lover and I just kept rolling misses. And so the lover died as the result of the mechanics. Mm-hmm. And, we played it really deep, profoundly. And it was, I told Brandon this and it's true. I'm a better person because of that game. Mm. My experiences in that fiction made me, Gwen, in the real world, a better person because it taught me a kind of, empathy and appreciation for certain things. And that's why we go to art, isn't it? Right. And I do think that a game, a role-playing game done well, when you're lucky, is like that. It's an art experience, or it can be that moving for me, at least. And what's one of the powerful parts about it is the fact that I'm embodying a part of the creation process. I'm not only collaborating in the creation, but I'm also experiencing it as both the artist and the audience, and it's such a magical alchemy.
Yeah, and you were talking about art. Art is hit and miss too, just like RPGs. Yeah. It's not like every time you get in front of the easel, you're going to create a masterpiece. There's going to be a lot of moments where it doesn't flow and the magic doesn't happen. And I think, with these games and this hobby, I just want to really appreciate when the magic does happen and be able to really be present for it. And it sounds like that was a really transformative experience, that game of Night Witches. And I'm sure it's going to stick with you and has stuck with you. And I can think of moments like that in games where I just was like all in. And we talk about bleed, but I think when our real emotions are engaged by a game in a powerful way, and maybe this is just me or us or a certain style of playing that we're talking about, it just brings a lot of meaning to the experience. And it's amazing.
Yeah, for me, I think it depends on what my relation is to the character. So if it's a character that I've invested a lot of me in it, I've definitely had characters that are like, I don't want to call them Mary Sue's. That's not the right phrase, right? But there is, sometimes you play a character, it's just a stand-in for you or part of you. I identify with it in a special way. I love this character in a special way, flaws and all, whatever. But then other times I play a character that is just interesting to me, right? And that's something maybe different than, oh, this is me. When I sit down to play, and this is all about that buy-in and what's the word I'm looking for? Like the social contract that's the premise of the game, the agreement before the game about what kind of game you're going to play really matters. And that's why session zeros are so important. Because if I'm sitting down to play a game of Delta Green or Call of Cthulhu or something, I know character's unlikely to live very long. Then I'm like, okay, I want to have a character that's just interesting. And I don't feel the same sort of visceral, that's just more entertaining than profound. Although maybe I'm not playing Call of Cthulhu with the right people. I don't know. But
for me, this comes back to the idea of creating a character that is a foil.
Yeah.
Sometimes in games, not even games that are as explicitly lethal or take your character out in some other different type of way, if it's Call of Cthulhu, I like to play a character where I'm playing with the intention of crashing the stolen car. Mm-hmm. because I want to see how much of a fireball I can make. And a lot of the time I will make that decision as early on as, and then the dice fall how they fall, right? But like I'll choose moves, I'll choose stats if it's a game with like a relationship building mechanic at the beginning of it, like a Hearts of Wulin or something. I will poison those or strain those in some way. Mm-hmm. I'm curious about how you guys approach the process of creating connections between your character and others in a game that has rules for it versus how you do it in a game that maybe doesn't, where there's not a specific procedure.
So one thing that I kind of like to say when talking about games is that the dice are one of the characters at the table, or players at the table, right? And so if there's mechanics for relationships, I really do want to honor like how the dice fall. Like, so if it's a game in which I have to roll to influence somebody or turn them on or, get them to empathize with me and I roll really poorly, I really kind of lean into that. I'm like, you know what? I do not get along with this person. And, we see how that plays out. I allow relationships to develop as the dice suggest they will. And also, of course, the other player's choices. And I think that's fun because that's kind of how the world works sometimes. You come to somebody with the best of intentions and there's a disconnect. And sometimes those are much more interesting than everyone being simpatico in it, right? Then if there aren't rules, however, again, it depends more, I think, on social cues between you and the other player. So if it's someone that I know well, we've played before, we know and trust each other, then it's quite fun to sometimes be like, hey, I think my character is really going to have a problem with you. How do you feel about that? Always checking in when there's something that could be hostile or unpleasant beforehand. Hey, what do you feel about our characters having a romantic relationship or being brothers and sisters or whatever? Yeah, I'll do that. I'll just kind of do a check-in. If I don't know them though, I'll be a little bit more respectful and tentative. I am absolutely the kind of person that likes to see those develop in play if there's not a mechanic for it at the beginning. I definitely have sat down at tables of D&D and other sorts of games that don't have rules for that. And then everyone's like, how do we know each other? Well, we're brothers and we work together. And it's like, okay, this is all irrelevant because once the game starts, we're making a new story. And I'm absolutely of the mind that like, whatever, you know each other, it doesn't matter. Just start playing, get into the story when there's rules. Because I'm one of the people that believes that, and I could talk a lot about this because it's something that's really interesting to me. The game is the rules. The game experience is something when you use the game. So if it's not in the rules, it's not a part of the game. So if there are relationships happening in D&D between characters, there's no rules for those. So that's like table talk. And there's nothing wrong with table talk, but it's not part of the game. I'm one of those people that was like, well, you're not really doing that. You're like, oh, you had a D&D session where it was all role play. Okay, well, then you weren't really playing D&D. It's just like the difference between a play and a performance, right? The play is written, the performance is live. The game is written, the session is not. If the relationship's part of the game, I follow the rules and I do what the dice say. If it's not, whatever. We talk about it, but it's less important, frankly.
Well, Jose, do you have anything to add?
Well, I've been thinking about this, and now it's coming up as I'm listening to you, Gwen, even more acutely for me. So now I'm thinking about a game that does have a mechanic. The specific instance I'm thinking about is Hearts of Wulin, that has the entanglement mechanic. And for those of you who haven't played it, as part of character generation and part of session 0, you think about these things called entanglements, which are sometimes with PCs and NPCs, but there have to be 3 of them, and there has to be some kind of conflict or friction within it. When I first heard about these, I was so jazzed about them because I loved the fact that the game was prioritizing something that I thought was so important to the drama of storytelling. But my experience as a player is frequently when I'm sitting in session 0 and it's time to make entanglements, I just get overwhelmed. it's like, oh my God, I can't create one. I can't create one. I just keep thinking about all these different possibilities. So I am going to be starting a Hearts of Wulin game in 3 weeks, I think.
Mm,
But the GM created a Discord channel. We started discussing our character generation. It went out of control. And we are also now talking about entanglements. And it was nice to have more time for me to kind of process what I was hearing from the other characters and think about how my character might create an entanglement with them. But the one thing that really came up for me this morning, actually, and it was when you were just talking about social cues, like when you know someone, and if
mm,
that helps you make this bridge this gap of like, how are we going to create a conflict or something a little more juicy between our characters. I was playing with Agatha. Well, we weren't
mhm,
playing, we were in the Discord channel together talking about
mhm,
entanglements, and she was producing lots of different options. And Mads, another wonderful member of the Open Hearth, was saying, "You're giving me too many options. Wait, you're giving me too many options. Just tell me one." And Agatha said, "Well, the reason I'm giving you multiple options is because I'm not across the table from you right now, so I can't see your nonverbal cues, and I don't want to give you just one option because you might not like and feel kind of pressured to take on. And so I want to test the waters with multiple options to see where you're going." And I thought that was such a beautiful, I know, it was so considerate, and it was so supportive of a fellow player during character generation so that another player could cue what's the direction that feels good to me in the relationship between our two characters rather than me just saying something. So shout out to Agatha, because that's really making me think a lot about how I can be more responsive to my fellow players during character
mm.
generation, especially in these kinds of mechanics, right?
That's a really especially wise and skillful way of managing online play because we don't have those. I will say that I haven't played Hearts of Wulin, but I prefer games that are more traditionally powered by the apocalypse style, where there's just a sentence with a blank in it.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll be like, blank knew me from before my transformation. That's one from the Transformed in Masks. And it's like, it's really delineated. And that's actually one of the things I think is brilliant about the Powered by the Apocalypse family is that when you roll something, it gives you questions to ask. Like when you do one of the like perceive types roles or like investigate, it says you can ask this many questions and it gives you a list. Because if it was just open ended, it's overwhelming. It's like I can just ask any three questions.
Sort of narrows the field of possibility a little bit so that you don't have to contend with every question that could be asked.
Right.
It's only the ones that are relevant to the situation.
And I think that applies to character generation too. I've now realized that saying it out loud, I realize that what I'll do is when I come into a character creation process, especially if there's many options, like this game of Beacon, there's like 20 different classes and they're all mechanically chewy and different things. And so I just am kind of like, so I just kind of arbitrarily, well, I'm going to do one of this sorts of things in this domain. I just kind of set artificial boundaries for myself. And then I let the character rules and mechanics continue to do that through the game as kind of like, this is my play space, that helps. I think that helps with creativity. I'm the kind of person that writes much better when I have a prompt than a blank page, for example.
I think I was saying this to you, Jose, in the first episode that we did, which is that a really powerfully written playbook is like an invitation forward to role playing. This is part of why I was saying, I go about the process in the order that I do, because sometimes a playbook is enough to just give me a character idea all on its own. I've sung this game's praises before, and I probably will again. This is when we did our game of the year for Open Hearth in 2023. This was my pick. Is this game called Fathom, which is mixes some of the Blades in the Dark structure with the dice mechanics from a game called Heart, the City Beneath. And it's all about exploring the kind of like surreal underworld of a modern day metropolis. The classes and playbooks in this game are things like You're a creature from the unreal underworld who has decided to try their hand at being human for a little while. You are a monster in a human shaped suit, and all of your abilities and powers and questions and sort of relevant specific topics come from how are you maintaining that mask? What happens when the mask slips? What happens if it's an accident or if you do it on purpose? And all of that is just like, it's just full of questions that I get to just come in and fill in the blank, which is so great. I love this.
Oh, I mean, it's the same sort of way when I sit down and I look at, like, for example, I mentioned the Transformed from Masks, which is one of my favorite because it's about dealing with body dysmorphia and all kinds of identity things, which is my jam apparently. And but when you look at the moves, it's very clear the kind of themes they're trying to explore with the playbook. Thirsty Sword Lesbians is the same way. I'm playing probably the closest thing to the Transformed you can in Thirsty Sword Lesbians, which is the Beast. And this is a character who is struggling with the fact that their true self isn't necessarily socially acceptable. And what do they mask, or do they let their mask drop? I think when you look at the moves and how that informs the exploration of those themes, it's just, for me, that is like, oh, I know who this character is, or who I want it to be, you know? So a well-made, well-written game, certainly in the PbtA family, but also in some other systems too, a well-written class or set of mechanics lend themselves well to certain kinds of role play. For me, at least, I find them to be invitations. That's a great word.
I have another question for you.
That's why I'm here.
Both of you and also for myself, I suppose. What is it that Thomas Manuel says in the Yes Indeed show? All advice is advice for myself.
Yes.
Actually, this is not my question. This comes from our fellow community member, Shane, who asks in our Discord, I'd be interested to hear you talk about the differences between creating characters separately in advance and creating characters together during the first session. It sounds like what Jose is going through with the Hearts of Wulin is maybe a little bit of both. Maybe not so much of a binary and maybe more of a continuum. Yeah, do you guys have any thoughts about that?
I mean, I think it does boil down to the point I was making before, which is that it depends whether there's mechanics for relationships. If there's not, a lot of character creation is done kind of in a vacuum. You just choose your ancestry, your class, your abilities, your spells, whatever. And then you might at the end be like, wait a minute, how does this person created in a vacuum fit into the world we're playing in? I mean, like D&D is a classic example. You could take the exact same character basically and be like, well, I'm in the Forgotten Realms, I'm in Greyhawk, I'm in Eberron, I'm in Planescape, I'm in Dark Sun. And it's the same character. Doesn't really matter. I'm with this party or that party or that party. Whereas a lot of the PbtA games, it's all about, I mean, bonds or relationships or entanglements or strings or whatever. That's half the game. Some games allow that independent, that lonely fun, as one game theorist put it. They're reading the book and writing your characters all by yourself. And some can't be done that way. And like Hearts of Wulin can't be done in a vacuum.
But there's like this dialectic between, I shouldn't use dialectic when I speak.
No, but I almost used it a minute ago. No, it's good. You're right.
Sorry. I don't want to get in trouble with the philosophy professor.
Okay. I'm off duty. It's fine.
There's almost a dialectic between this kind of lonely work. Is that what you called it? Or
lonely fun?
Lonely fun. I like that better. Between the lonely fun and the let's just call it the social fun or the collaborative fun, right? At the table when you're trying to create not just the world and the factions and the interrelationships and all of that. I feel like for me, I do have the lonely fun, but I leave it, what I've created, I try to make it porous enough that when I come to the table, I'm not like dropping it like a ton of bricks onto the table and it says, this is who my character is. But that it's porous enough then to keep morphing It's got a core to it, like you were talking about, maybe a core motivation or a core. There's some core to it that I want to be loyal to, that's emerged in my imagination. But I also want it to be porous and responsive enough to what I'm hearing, either on the Discord channel ahead of time or when we come together in session 0, so that it can magically morph in these unexpected ways that my Lonely Fun can't. But it feels like both of the ingredients are necessary for me to create that. Let's use alchemy. That's a word that you've used before as well, Gwen. That alchemy that creates characters that are compelling for me.
I want to follow on from that and just point out how, in my view, I think this connects to what we were talking about earlier with like a backfilling. You were talking about letting whatever you have come up with remain malleable, like remain susceptible to unforeseen circumstances. And I feel like that's happening all the time. One of the most important skills that I think that I'm still learning as a player is how to not, it's something that I maybe didn't really start developing until I started playing with this community, is how to, let's say my character biffs a roll like really badly. It's not really fun to just be like, well, I just didn't bring my criminal mastermind hat today. Sorry, everybody. It's an opportunity, actually, if you can then kind of backfill and say, what about the character, that some detail that we didn't know yet, that is surfacing right at this moment, played into this moment of failure.
Somebody once said that, and this is controversial, that we're not telling a story when we play a game, because a story is a coherent narrative that holds together in a certain sort of way. And that is only really done at the end of a game retrospectively. Mm-hmm. And so we're just doing things. At the end, we might be able to tell a story about how it all made sense for a character, or how it all made sense in the world, or how that's just, oh, I didn't know this was going to be a tragic tale until the end, or whatever. And there's a sense in which I think that's right for character arcs too. It's like, there's an ancient Greek dictum that like you can't declare a person's life happy until it's over, to the end. The idea being that, well, you never know what's going to happen. It might go bad. They might lose everything. It might be tragic, actually, not happy at all.
They might, confess and repent on their deathbed or whatever, right?
Right. It might have this, Anakin Skywalker story or whatever, where you're like, oh, I mean, I'm not going to call his life a happy one, but there's a sense in which it's certainly not tragic anymore in the way it might have been. It's a redemption story, maybe. For real, though, I do think you're right that I have also done that thing where I played a character that I wanted the character to be competent at something, and I just kept rolling so poorly that I'm like, well, okay, I'm playing this character for comedy, apparently, and it just became that, and vice versa. I have absolutely played in games with people that have like their character as a joke concept, but after 10 sessions, they're like in tears because something important happened to this character. It takes on this deep meaning. Again, that's the magic, right? Characters like the rest of us change over time and through our experiences.
Yeah, and I was thinking, when you made that Aristotle reference, I was thinking to like, what happens to the character after the game's over? When it closes, then it constellates in my mind in a way that during the run, it's still in this porous, amorphous shape that's still like surprising me. And then after the game's over and we've done our epilogues and maybe not just right after, but I know we're talking about character creation here, but now I'm talking about character ending, which is off topic, but but there's something about it that gels, and they go up on the little Hall of Fame if they're a great character, on my little shelf, like, oh, and I'll go back and look at my notes every once in a while and think, oh, I remember that character. But now it has this sense of a crystallized entity that I can appreciate in a way, and an arc, obviously, that I can appreciate in a way that I didn't during the course of the game.
To go with the ancient Greek metaphor, play is fired and the story on the Grecian.
That's right.
There you go. Right. On the vase. No, I mean, look, I think we're all constantly creating ourselves in our choices, in our lives. Yeah. And it's true for character too. Character creation does not stop until the game is over.
Listeners, thanks for tuning in to this session 1 of A Different Kind of Hex. It was a real privilege to have Gwen on the show, and we're very grateful to her for coming on and kicking off the show with us. Coming up soon on A Different Kind of Hex, we're going to have episodes focusing on setting and following character goals, about player agency and the way that it interacts with game mechanics, and about negotiating scenes and the character arcs that those scenes make up between players at the table, live. If there's a particular topic you'd like to hear us cover on the show, or maybe you want to come on as a guest, reach out to us at adifferenthex@gmail.com. The music that I wrote for this show can be found at lloydeaves.bandcamp.com. That's LLOYDEAVES.bandcamp.com. And the Open Hearth can be found at openhearthgaming.com or at openhearthrpg on Blue Sky, Mastodon, and Tumblr. We always have games on the calendar, and sometimes there are even special events, like May the 4th coming up in a couple of months, a whole weekend of Star Wars and Star Wars-themed gaming. Perfect for the release of Andor Season 2. I'll be running something, and I hope to see you there. Listeners, catch us next time on A Different Kind of Hex.
It might have this, Anakin Skywalker story or whatever, where you're like, oh, I mean, I'm not going to call his life a happy one, but, there's a sense in which it's certainly not tragic anymore in the way it might have been. It's a redemption story, maybe, even though I myself don't like it and don't buy it, because after you do what you did with the little Padawans and younglings, there's no coming back from that, Anakin. I don't care. No Force Ghost for you.